In 1968, the Italian Navy blew up a country. Not a rebel base, not a pirate radio station, a country. It had a president, a flag, a currency, and a post office that printed its own stamps. It had existed for about 8 months. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the map on your wall. Every line on it won a fight. And the alternatives were real. They had constitutions, capitals, people who believed they were about to become citizens of somewhere new. Then they lost, and we forgot. 7 countries that almost made it. Starting with the one Italy dynamited. Giorgio Rosa was an Italian engineer with a problem. He wanted to build something without anyone telling him how. So in the mid-60s, he built a platform in the Adriatic Sea. 400 square meters standing on 9 steel pylons, about 11 kilometers off the coast of Rimini, and, critically, just outside Italian territorial waters. Then he did the part nobody expected. On the 1st of May, 1968, he declared it an independent nation. He made himself president. He named it the Republic of Rose Island, and he chose Esperanto as the official language, because if you're inventing a country, you may as well invent it properly. It had a restaurant, a bar, a nightclub, a souvenir shop, and a post office issuing Rose Island stamps. He was designing a currency. And Italy absolutely lost its mind. Not over the sovereignty, really. Over taxes. A functioning business, 20 minutes offshore, outside the reach of Italian tax law, in the middle of 1968, a year when young Europeans were already looking for any excuse to tell their governments where to go. Rose Island became a symbol, which meant it had to stop being a place. Italian police occupied the platform in June. The Navy set up a blockade so nobody could dock. And in February 1969, Italian Navy divers wired the pylons with explosives and blew the whole thing into the sea. A storm finished the job a few weeks later. The wreckage is still down there. 8 months. One of the shortest-lived nations in modern history, and it died because a man built a restaurant in the wrong place. You know this one's flag. You just don't know it's this one's flag. In 1810, the strip of Gulf coast running east from Baton Rouge was Spanish territory. Sort of. Spain claimed it. The United States also claimed it. And the people living there were mostly American settlers with opinions about both. On September 23rd, a militia column rode on the Spanish fort at Baton Rouge and took it. At the front of that column was a blue flag with a single white 5-pointed star, sewn a few days earlier by a woman named Melissa Johnson. 3 days later, they declared independence. And they did it properly. A constitution modeled on the American one, 3 branches of government, a capital at St. Francisville. They elected as governor a man named Fulwar Skipwith, a former American diplomat who had helped negotiate the Louisiana Purchase itself, which tells you something about what this actually was, because West Florida immediately asked the United States to annex it. This was never really a bid for independence. It was a bid to force Washington's hand, and Washington took the hint fast. President Madison proclaimed the territory annexed on October 27th, barely a month after the revolt. American troops occupied St. Francisville on December 6th. On December 10th, the Lone Star flag came down over Baton Rouge, and the Stars and Stripes went up. The Republic of West Florida lasted 74 days. But the flag didn't die. 51 years later, when southern states began leaving the Union, they raised it again. That single white star on blue became the Bonnie Blue flag, an icon of the Confederacy that started its life over a Spanish fort in Louisiana, flying for a country that existed for 10 weeks. This one lasted 1 day. March 1939. Czechoslovakia is being dismantled. Hitler is taking the Czech lands. Slovakia has just declared independence, and in the far eastern corner sits a mountainous region that had been quietly promised autonomy. Its leaders made a calculation. If Slovakia could declare independence and survive under German protection, maybe they could too. So on March 15, 1939, in the town of Khust, they declared the Republic of Carpatho-Ukraine. They elected a president, Augustin Voloshin, a Greek Catholic priest. They made Ukrainian the official language. They adopted the flag and the anthem that modern Ukraine uses today. The calculation was wrong. Hungary had been waiting for exactly this moment, and Germany had quietly signaled it wouldn't object. On the same day the Republic was declared, 40,000 Hungarian troops crossed the border. Defending the new nation were roughly 2,000 lightly armed volunteers called the Carpathian Sich. That is not a battle. That's arithmetic. By March 16th, the next day, Hungary had formally annexed the entire territory. Voloshin fled. He was arrested by Soviet agents in Prague in 1945 and died in a Moscow prison the same year. The Republic existed for less than 24 hours. And if you want to know where it was, look at the far western edge of Ukraine today. It's a region called Zakarpattia, and it still carries the same coat of arms. Some countries vanish. Tannu Tuva is stranger than that. Tannu Tuva became a rumor. It sat between Siberia and Mongolia, and when the Qing dynasty collapsed, it broke away, the way Mongolia did. In 1921, it became the Tuvan People's Republic. A treaty confirmed its independence in 1926, though only the Soviet Union and Mongolia ever recognized it, and Moscow was pulling most of the strings. It ran 23 years. Its capital was a city called Kyzyl. Then, in 1944, mid-war, it was absorbed into the Soviet Union and stopped appearing on maps. Here's why anyone outside Tuva knows the name. Between the wars, Tannu Tuva printed stamps. Not normal stamps, triangles and diamonds in bright colors, showing camel caravans and horse races, and men hunting on horseback. Around 100 different designs in 3 years. They were cheap, they were everywhere, and if you were a kid collecting stamps in America in the 1930s, you almost certainly owned one. One of those kids was Richard Feynman. He never forgot it. Decades later, Nobel Prize, Manhattan Project, the whole resume, he became fixated on actually going to Tuva, purely because of those childhood stamps, and because the capital was spelled Kyzyl. He and a friend spent 10 years fighting Soviet bureaucracy trying to get permission. He died in 1988 before it came through. A country that most of the world only ever experienced as a postage stamp. And one of the greatest physicists of the century spent the last decade of his life trying to reach it. This is the one that hurts, because this one nearly worked. On January 3rd, 1958, 10 British Caribbean territories federated into a single nation. Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Grenada, Dominica, St. Lucia, Antigua, Montserrat, St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Nevis Anguilla. The plan was independence, not 10 small colonies negotiating separately with London, but one Caribbean nation with real weight. A capital at Port of Spain, a prime minister, a federal Supreme Court, a flag designed by the sculptor Edna Manley, blue with white waves and a golden sun. And then they started doing the math. Jamaica was the biggest member, the biggest economy, and the furthest away, about 1,000 miles from everybody else. Jamaican voters started asking why their taxes should subsidize small islands they'd never visit. In September 1961, Jamaica held a referendum on leaving. 54% voted to go, which left Trinidad. Now, the largest remaining member, now responsible for roughly 3/4 of the federal budget, while holding under half the seats. Trinidad's Premier Eric Williams looked at that and delivered one of the great political dismissals in history. 4 words. 1 from 10 leaves nought. Subtract Jamaica from 10, and you have nothing. Trinidad left 2. The Federation was formally dissolved on May 31st, 1962, after 4 years. Jamaica became independent that August, Trinidad and Tobago 3 weeks later. And the Caribbean nation that might have existed instead became a dozen small states, most of which are still small states today. In April 1895, China lost a war to Japan. and in the peace treaty, it handed over an island. Nobody asked the island. The people on Taiwan found out they'd been transferred to the Japanese Empire by treaty, and a group of officials and local leaders decided they weren't going. On May 23, 1895, they proclaimed the Republic of Formosa in Taipei, declaring themselves free and democratic, which made them arguably the first republic in Asia. They installed the Qing Governor-General, Tang Jingsong, as president, and brought in Liu Yongfu, a general who'd beaten the French in Vietnam, to command the army. Not a single foreign government recognized them. Legally, the island already belonged to Japan. The treaty said so. Nobody in Europe was going to touch it. Japanese troops landed near Keelung on May 29th, 6 days after the declaration. President Tang fled within a week, but the republic didn't fold. Liu Yongfu took over, and Taiwanese militia and Hakka fighters turned what Japan expected to be a 1-month occupation into a 5-month war. Baguishan, in August, was the largest battle ever fought on Taiwanese soil. Tainan fell on October 21st. The republic was finished, and 50 years of Japanese rule began. 5 months. And if you've ever wondered why the question of Taiwan's status is quite so tangled, this is one of the knots. There was a moment in 1895 when it declared itself a country. It just didn't get to keep it. We'll finish with the one that had a queen from New York. Sikkim was a Himalayan kingdom wedged between Nepal, Bhutan, and Tibet, ruled by the Namgyal dynasty since 1642. Its king held the title Chogyal, roughly righteous king. Small, Buddhist, mountainous, and a protectorate first of Britain and then of India. But a kingdom. 330 years of one. In 1963, the Crown Prince married an American. Hope Cook was a young woman from New York who'd met him while traveling. When he was crowned in 1965, she became queen. The first American-born woman to become a queen consort anywhere. For a while, she was genuinely famous, an American in a palace at the roof of the world. It fell apart in about a decade. Sikkim had a Nepali-speaking majority with limited political power, rising pressure for democracy, and a king increasingly at odds with both his own population and with India, which had strategic reasons to want that Himalayan border settled permanently. In April 1975, the Indian Army entered the capital, Gangtok, and disarmed the palace guard. The king was confined to his palace. Days later, a referendum was held on abolishing the monarchy and joining India. The result was 59,637 votes to 1,496. The king said it was rigged. Foreign press weren't allowed to observe. On May 16, 1975, the monarchy was abolished and Sikkim became India's 22nd state. After he was deposed, the Chogyal was asked whether he'd leave. He said he was born there and he would die there. He died in New York City in 1982. Here's what I keep coming back to. We talk about the map like it's a description of the world, like borders are just facts, the way rivers are facts. They're not. Every one of them is a decision that got enforced, usually by whoever had more soldiers, better timing, or a bigger neighbor. Rose Island failed because Italy had explosives. West Florida failed because it wanted to. Carpatho-Ukraine failed because of a border crossing on the exact day it was born. The West Indies failed at a ballot box. Formosa failed in a treaty signed by people who'd never been there. Sikkim failed in a referendum nobody outside was allowed to watch. None of them were fantasies. All of them had a flag. The only real difference between the countries on your map and the countries in this video is that these ones lost. Which raises the obvious question. Which of the ones we've got right now are we making this video about in 100 years?